HCG is like released and everything to keep it from shedding. So how does a miscarriage happen then? If all this is being
There's
prevented?
a whole zillion different ways. It could be that the embryo isn't viable for other reasons. It could be that later on in pregnancy, I'll show you in just a second what maintains the lining of the uterus later, because the HCG is eventually going to go away. And there could be a problem with that. It could be mechanical trauma. It could be a toxic response. There's all kinds of different things. Depends on when and where you're at. Basically, anything that could go wrong could go wrong. Could go wrong. So yeah, it may just be an issue with the thing didn't implant in the first place. In which case, unless you did a very early pregnancy test, you wouldn't have even known that was there. That's what the what do they call it? The Plan B is going to make the uterine lining not able to maintain implantation. I don't know the mechanism of that, to tell you the truth. I don't know what it specifically does to make that happen, but it makes it inhospitable. If it happens later, that's probably got to, it could have something to do with maybe the placenta attaches.
I heard about the mother's like body can reject it.
It's rare, but it's possible. I mean, usually, well, actually, let me do later, and then I'll address that here, because we got to get a placenta in here. So far, that's early on. This is microscopically small. This is a few days post-fertilization attachment. Eventually, this blastula isn't a blastula anymore. It becomes a gastrula and a neurula, and eventually you got a fetus and a placenta in there. The placenta interfaces to the mother's blood supply so that oxygen and nutrients can be acquired by the fetus, and there's an amniotic sac, the whole deal. But you need an estrogen supply and a progesterone supply. You need the sex steroid levels to stay high and actually get higher throughout. Here's 28 days. Here's the rest of pregnancy. Okay. You need that to happen. And it's not going to be the job of the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum is going to regress to a corpus albicans something like maybe 10 weeks after fertilization, because the production of HCG is stopped. But that's okay, because in the meantime, you found an even better source for lots of sex steroids. You don't need the corpus luteum anymore. That responsibility of sex steroid production has been handed off to the placenta itself. The placenta, which is, I'm not even going to try to draw, the placenta is actually hormonally tremendously active. It's very active endocrine tissue, produces a bunch of different hormones, including sex steroids, estrogen and progesterone, which are significantly required, A, to maintain the pregnancy itself, but B, for other sort of preparative things. You have to get tissues of the breast ready so that lactation can occur after birth. There's like a million other things that the sex steroids are doing in addition to what they're doing at the level of the uterus during pregnancy. And you got that taken care of. Those high levels of sex steroids are going to act as negative feedback on the hypothalamus, so that the hypothalamus isn't going to start cranking out GnRH, because if it cranks out GnRH a month after this, that means the pituitary is going to crank out FSH and LH, which means what's going to happen? You're going to ovulate again. You don't want to be pregnant and then get pregnant again a month later. That doesn't make any sense. It's not mechanically possible. So you're not going to be ovulating while you're pregnant, because that's taken care of. So anyhow, let's see. So we got estrogen. I guess we got all the bases covered with hormones here. So what about rejection? You have a genetically distinct organism inside of you when you're pregnant. Yes, some of its DNA is yours, but not all of it, and it's antigenically different. In other words, this isn't judgmental, this is pure biology. It is a parasite. And that is, literally speaking, this is parasitism. It's taking nutrients and oxygen and things from you, and it's not you. It's something else. So it turns out that normally fetal tissue doesn't have significant antigen on it. It doesn't look like adult tissue. It doesn't have remember the MHCs, the major histocompatibility complexes, when we talked about the immune response last week. Those aren't developed on fetal tissue. So it's not like the mother's immune system is normally going to recognize that and say, hey, that's a foreign organism, we need to kill those cells. That's when it works correctly. There are exceptions to that when it does happen. But if you're wondering how come the mother's immune system doesn't just kill the embryo, it's because it doesn't recognize the embryo. It's been cloaked because it simply lacks distinct antigens. What we're going to do is fast forward. Now, if you take an embryology class, you get all details about this. It's great. Embryology is tremendous. There's a bunch of courses that I always recommend. If you get a chance to take them. Embryology is one of them, because you learn so much about cell biology, and genetics, and biochemistry, and it's just fantastic. But because this is general bio, and this is just the way we cover one of the many organ systems, I'm going to fast forward from that to birth. Okay, so skip a few dozen weeks, and now we're ready to give birth. Okay, so a whole bunch of stuff happened, right? And now we're going to move forward, because we got to talk about some of the hormones that are responsible for parturition, which is delivery. So let's do that. So I'm going to list, 2 or 3, 4 hormones here that are going to come into play for delivery and post-delivery, things that you need to set up here. Like we said, sex steroid levels have been increasing so that all of this is ready. You're primed to give birth at this point in time. The uterus is significantly mechanically stretched, which means the myometrium, the smooth muscle wall, has been significantly distended, and muscle cells like to contract when you aggravate them and stretch them. So there's potential for contractility there. Secondary tissues like mammary gland tissue has been developing so that you're capable of lactation. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But let's look at parturition itself, delivery, birth. So there's a couple of hormones responsible for making that uterus contract. But the one that's most important is this one. Oxytocin. Story on oxytocin. Oxytocin is one of only 2 hormones that gets released by the posterior pituitary gland. The other one is ADH. Remember ADH from that? So only 2 hormones, humans, only 2 hormones get released by the posterior pituitary. There's ADH, we covered that before, and oxytocin. Well, oxytocin isn't actually made by the posterior pituitary. It's got the same story as ADH. It's actually made by the hypothalamus, shipped off to the posterior pituitary, stored, and then released as needed. So in that way, it's got a similar history as ADH. Oxytocin is going to make uterine smooth muscle contract. So obviously that's what you need to do if you're going to give birth. Among other things, you got to get that muscle to contract. And you don't mean just a few muscle cells, you mean a lot of muscle cells all at once. So at the level of the myometrial cells, there must be oxytocin receptors, right? Absolutely. Well, if you have a uterus and you're not pregnant, there's some receptors there, and you're not even making that much oxytocin anyway. Oxytocin does other things in your body too. Both men and women make it. But for this purpose, oxytocin receptor density isn't terribly high on the uterus in non-pregnancy circumstances. However, during the 30-plus weeks of pregnancy, oxytocin receptor density has been going up. You've been building more and more and more and more oxytocin receptors on those uterine smooth muscle cells. By the way, estrogen is the trigger for that. Estrogen, one of its many functions in pregnancy, is telling those smooth muscle cells, get more sensitive to oxytocin. Now, something you already know about muscle in general, because we said it about heart muscle. Muscle demonstrates an all or none phenomenon. A single muscle cell is either contracted or relaxed. It can't be a little bit contracted or a little less contracted. It's either yes or no. So if you want to deliver an infant, you got to get a whole bunch of those cells to contract all at the same time. You can't get a couple over here and then later on a couple over here, because that's just going to cause pain and not do anybody any good. So you got to get them all to synchronize. Oxytocin tells those cells to contract, but you have to have enough oxytocin and enough sensitivity so that you get, hey, yeah, that's enough, that's a signal, I'm going to contract. And you got to get a whole bunch of them to do that all at the same time. So if you were to look at oxytocin levels throughout pregnancy, here's the entire 38 weeks of pregnancy. If you were to look at oxytocin levels throughout here, what do you expect the graph to look like? You expect probably that, right?
No.
No? What do you expect?
Should I just like kind of low and at the end goes up?
You're almost dead on. It's going to be flat, and then at the end goes up. Yes. Why?
Because you don't want muscles to contract in the middle of pregnancy.
Yeah, you don't want, like, at month 5 to get, oh, so those muscles are contracting. You don't want that to happen. You want them all to wait until you're ready, then all contract at once. Because that's having a few of them contract back here is going to do you no good. That's false labor. You're going, you're getting some contraction. Like, oh God, this is too early. This isn't right. Sometimes some of them do jump the gun a little bit and do that, but they're not supposed to. So oxytocin levels actually don't change throughout, not significantly throughout pregnancy, until you're ready to deliver. When you get the first contraction, first significant contractions, right as you go into labor, the levels leading up to that were pretty much what they were a week and 2 weeks and a month and 2 months prior to that. So why did these cells contract here and not here or here or here or here or here?
There is something that controls it.
Easier, simpler,
Estrogen levels?
simpler. If I'm a muscle cell, I'm a uterine muscle cell right here, I'm not contracting, I'm not contracting, I'm not contracting. Oxytocin levels are the same. All of a sudden I decide, oh yeah, now it's time, now I'm going to contract.
It finally reached like an actual potential. No.
Easier. What was different about my environment here than here? Or what was different about me here compared with here?
Baby's ready to come out.
So you're small.
On paper, yes, but physiologically.
You were small. Like pH is now.
I have more receptors now than I did back here, right? I'm more sensitive now than I was over here. Meanwhile, back here, I'm like, I'm making more receptors, still not enough to respond to that level. Make some more, still not responding, make some more, still not responding, make some more, there it goes. And now some of those cells respond. If I'm wearing a hearing aid and I turn it up to 3, I still can't hear you. Then I turn it up to 4. Your volume is staying the same. You're talking at the same level. And I keep turning it up, turning it up, turning it up. Finally, I hear you. I had to reach that level of sensitivity to be able to receive your signal. Some of these cells, hopefully none of them, were sensitive enough for all that time. And then all of a sudden, some of them build enough receptors so that that amount of oxytocin is going to trigger them. Not every cell, you're not going to have your first contraction, boom, there's the baby. It doesn't work quite that efficiently. But once you get that first significant group of cells to contract, now it's time to dump bucket loads of oxytocin in there so that the ones that were slightly less sensitive can respond. And then the ones that were even less sensitive than that can respond, and more and more and more. You don't want to have to wait another 9 months for another handful of cells to decide to be responsive. Right? You want this to, once you start, you want to finish this as quickly as possible. So what happens is, once you get the first contraction, there are nerves that lead from the myometrium up to the hypothalamus and posterior pituitary. Guess what they tell the posterior pituitary to do? Dump out more oxytocin. So you're getting, it's positive feedback here. That first contraction says, all right, now we're ready. Go ahead, pituitary. Dump out as much oxytocin as you can dump out as quickly as you can. And that happens. Each time there's a contraction, more cells jump on board because ones that couldn't respond to this much, now they can respond to that much. Ones that were less sensitive than that couldn't respond to this much, but they can respond to that much. So if you keep dumping more and more and more oxytocin, in other words, every time you get muscle cells to contract, more oxytocin gets dumped into the bloodstream, this should, theoretically, on paper, not take very long. Now, I know if you're in labor for 3 days, it's probably not what you're saying, but you know, everyone has a different experience with this, I suppose. Yes?
So what is a water break?
That's the amniotic fluid, because that amniotic sac that is regulating the environment of the infant has to get out of the way now.
Does that happen before it contracts or?
Sometimes it depends. It depends on the individual. You shaking your head no, so you could. For you, it was after. Okay. Yeah, it can go either way. It depends. Sometimes it's just mechanical, you know.
It actually didn't happen naturally. I had to have it.
Oh, you had to have it, bro. Okay, yeah.
I was in
So,
labor for a few hours.
did you get induced or did you?
No.
Oh, you okay?
So
So
my baby was premature though, 5 weeks premature.
oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's why they had to break through. Yeah. So your amniotic sac was not ready to go 5 weeks prior to that. Yeah. So when this, you know, like I said, there's such variation as to how, you know, you hear someone say, oh God, I was in labor for 6 days. You know, well, that's extreme, but, and then others like, oh yeah, that wasn't so bad. But not so many say the second thing, but you know. So that's why, so these oxytocin levels go up until you're done delivering, and then the contractility stops, and then it's just goes back to normal. Oxytocin is going to have another immediately important role here too, by the way, which I'll give you in a second. But that's its main thing. When they induce labor, they're giving you Pitocin, which is artificial oxytocin. They're just injecting you with the stuff because you're not moving along quickly enough. Something bad's going to happen if you don't deliver the baby, and you got to get more contractile. So they just give you an injection of oxytocin and speed things up. There are other hormones that come into play here and other paracrine factors. Let me give you 2 examples. During this period of time, leading up to and during labor, the placenta, like I said, the placenta makes a lot of hormones. The placenta is going to make a hormone, you're going to love this, called relaxin. Now, relaxin has a whole bunch of functions. It's made by both men and women. It's also made by the anterior pituitary, but in this case, it's being produced at significantly high levels, higher than you would see in non-pregnancy circumstances, produced by the placenta, and it's got a couple of jobs. It has skeletal effects. The curve of the end of the spine, if you're going to deliver, that needs to flatten out. Otherwise, you have the tailbone sticking up in the way. And so you have to have the connective tissue that kind of holds the vertebrae together needs to soften up, if you will, and that needs to happen. Relaxin's responsible for that. Relaxin's also responsible, if you remember the pubic symphysis from lab last week, it's responsible for allowing that otherwise barely movable joint to move more freely. So there's the left and right halves of the pubic bone, and there's the disc of cartilage here, and normally that's stuck solid. Relaxin's going to help that come apart because your pelvis has to undo itself, basically, for there to be enough room for that to happen. God, that sounds good. Anyway, relaxing, it's nicely moved. Relaxing always happens. Relaxing helps you do that. One other chemical factor, and this is not technically a hormone, but it's a humoral factor. There's chemicals involved. Those myometrial cells, so here's some muscle cells of the uterus. When they start to contract, not only are there nerves that go up and tell the hypothalamus and pituitary, hey, we need more oxytocin, these guys also release chemicals called prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are released by a whole bunch of different cells in your body for a whole bunch of reasons. But in this case, what they do is they make the the muscle cells more contractile. They enhance the contractility of these muscle cells. So this is, it really becomes an autocrine system here. These cells, when they contract, release a chemical that makes them even better to contract. It makes them contract even better. Okay. If this is all you had, you're not delivering, you need the oxytocin. But this sort of, I don't know, it assists the oxytocin. It makes it more effective because it increases the contractility. Prostaglandins are produced, like I said, a lot of other places in the body that have nothing whatsoever to do with pregnancy. Prostaglandins are some of the chemicals that are involved in inflammation. They're involved in the perception of pain. I'm guessing that this example is somewhat painful, but even in other painful circumstances. In fact, prostaglandins like NSAIDs, aspirin, drugs like that, ibuprofen, they act to block prostaglandin production, which is why they make you not perceive, analgesics often, not all of them, some of them act to prevent those things from getting produced in whatever tissue is hurting you, and therefore you don't perceive pain. But in this case, their job is make those cells contract even better than they would have otherwise, and that should facilitate this. So there's a bunch of chemical triggers that play a role in this. Okay. Wow. Gave birth and we still have a minute and a half left. So what we got to do on, let me set the scene for the rest of the time here. What we got to do in lab this week, there's no new material as far as anatomy goes. You've seen it already. So we'll have the, just listen up for a second. So we'll have the models out. You can review them. That's fine. I also want to show you some video. We have cesarean section video. I'll show you some of that. And I also want to talk about a little on lactation, and then a little bit about what those male reproductive parts are doing. If there's time, I can even do a quick intro to start the digestive system, but if not, we'll do that on Friday and next Wednesday. Next Wednesday is the last day of regular classes. So, time's flying.